Thank you all for attending. My name's Charlie Bullen. I'm president of the Phoenix Friends of Carl Jung, and I'm really glad that we've got a great opportunity this morning with Dr. Merritt. I'm going to turn this over to Will.
Thank you, Charlie. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Dennis Merritt, a Jungian psychoanalyst and eco-psychologist in private practice in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, whose work bridges psychology, spirituality, and our relationship with the environment. Dr. Merritt is a diplomate of the C.G. Jung Institute of Zurich, Switzerland, and he is a member of the Chicago Society of Jungian Analysts. He holds a master's degree in clinical humanistic psychology from Sonoma State University, California, a doctorate degree in insect pathology from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's and bachelor's degree in entomology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Merritt grew up on a small dairy farm in Wisconsin, where he developed a deep connection with the land and inspired his work. His worldview has also been profoundly shaped by over 25 years of participation in the Lakota Sioux ceremonies. He is the author of The Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, Jung, Hermes, and Eco-Psychology, where Dr. Merritt explores the psyche's relationship to the environment through dream work, the I Ching, and complexity theory, focusing on connecting more deeply with nature, archetypes, and cultural phenomena. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dennis Merritt.
Well, thank you. As I was saying before, it would have been nice to have been in Arizona today instead of here in Wisconsin. So this is the main message that I want to communicate today, is that Jung's New Age will have an ecological framework. That's the farm I grew up on, 25 miles east of Green Bay, Dead End Road. We had 25 cows. Now there are 2 farms in Kewaunee County with 10,000 cows. So the little family dairy farm has pretty much disappeared. So I formed a deep love for the cows and the pigs and the chickens. But what I loved most was spending time in the woods and the marshland. When the 4-H Club project, I learned the names of all the trees and the wildflowers and the birds. The last project I did was entomology. So by the 8th grade, I decided if I was smart enough, get a university education, I wanted to be a research entomologist in a big university. I had the good fortune, even though we had only 50 kids in my graduating class, to have an excellent science teacher. I've been an environmentalist since 1958, my first year in high school. Graduated in 62, that's the year Silent Spring came out. And I didn't want to be a spray jockey. After getting my entomology degrees in Madison, there's yours truly in Berkeley, got there fall in 1967. My hair was a little longer then. There's my bell-bottom pants. And it was a revolutionary time on the campus. I knew it. Jung was in the air. Long story short, by being in Berkeley in the late 60s, that's how I got from insect pathology to becoming a Jungian analyst. Insect pathology, that's microbial control of insect pests, so you don't have to use chemical pesticides. I started reading Jung in the fall of 1973. I had already done my research project, passed all my exams, ready to run the data through the computer. That's when I discovered Jung. I was so taken by Jung. I saw it as a way to integrate spirituality, psychology, and science. I applied to Zurich, got accepted, and after I finished training, I had some big dreams, I'll talk about them later, that helped me replace myself back here in Wisconsin. So in 1991, my wife and I did week-long Spirit in the Land, Spirit in Animals, Spirit in People seminars. This was to bring together Jungian psychology, science, and Native American spirituality. We did that for 2 years. And then in 1994, the University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension had us do a 2-day program called Spirit in the Land, an interdisciplinary approach to environmental education. It was for educators, and it got some of the highest reviews they had had to that point. So we knew that we were onto something. So the talks that I gave at the Spirit and the Land conference were the genesis of my 4 volumes of the Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, Jung, Hermes, and Ecopsychology. This is volume 2, The Cry of Merlin, Jung, the prototypical eco-psychologist, and I'll develop that concept later on. Volume 3, Hermes, Eco-Psychology and Complexity Theory. I see Hermes as the god of eco-psychology, and the application of complexity theory to Jung's main concept. To me as a scientist, I think this is the way to talk about archetypes. I'm so excited about it. Land, weather, seasons, insects. That's where I applied the many concepts, myths and I Ching, dreams, Hillman's imaginal psychology, to looking at the Midwest, the weather here in the Midwest and the seasons, and to insects. And my last book came out in January, 4th volume, in January of 2013. And in 2009, I gave a talk at Tom Lane's Journey into Wholeness conference that I called Coming Soon to Your Planet, Apocalypse Now. Here's kind of the emblem for global warming. So this first part of my presentation is going to be a big bummer. I'm going to look with as honest an eye as I can at just where we are with regard to the environment and dealing with it. So what is frightening is that twice now, these international panels of climate experts have made their predictions based on the data that they had of where they thought things would be like a certain number of years down the line. So imagine those paths, these predicted paths of a hurricane. They kind of have an inner cone where the hurricane is most likely to affect, and then they have an outer cone, which is the outermost possible range that the hurricane could hit. Well, if you took that as an image for the predictions for climate change, twice now that I've known of, just from, and I'm not an expert on this, I just kind of follow it to a certain degree, but I know at least twice that the predictions are worse than the worst case scenarios, like outside of the zone of where they thought the hurricane could possibly even hit. For years now, we thought the Arctic was warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. And it's only been in the last year or two that we discovered it's actually warming 4 times faster. And in some places, 7 times faster than the rest of the planet. So we're still putting carbon dioxide up there. The peak of our putting it up there is going to happen sometimes next year. So even if we went to net zero tomorrow, what's up there is going to be up there for 100 years, and it's going to make things exponentially worse. So all this attempt to go to net zero by 2050, halfway there by 2030, which is unlikely we're going to be halfway there, and that's going to be kind of low-hanging fruit. We got to keep doing that, but let's be honest about what's really happening in the background. So let's look at the Paris Accords in 2015. Promised to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, that's 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And the aim was to try to keep it at or below 1.5 Celsius, which is 2.7 Fahrenheit. Well, the bad news is that we hit 1.5 Celsius already, so we're on our way toward 2 degrees Celsius. And this is an article from David Wallace Wells. He's written a lot about climate change. In 2022, he said, the expected climate warming predictions have been cut in half over the past several years due to drastic decline in the price of renewables, global political mobilization, a clearer picture of our energy future, and a serious policy focus by world leaders. So instead of what they thought could be 3 to 5 degrees maximum increase, it now looks like it's going to be between 2 and 3 degrees. Well, that's the good news, but many of you who have been following the climate change issues know of Catherine Hayhoe, and she said, I quote, "Even if the temperature is limited to 2 degrees, the extremes might be what we projected for 4 to 5 degrees. And that 5 degrees has been talked about as possible collapse in human civilization. And what is frightening is that scientists now, this is the latest thing I heard, they don't really know why the environment is warming as fast as it will. We're talking about international panels here. So of course, there's the warmer it gets, the greater the possibility that going to reach potential tipping points. And this would be a collapse in the Amazon rainforest, a melting of the permafrost. I did hear that the Arctic Ocean may be ice-free by 2027, and there's our poor polar bear, and the concern about the instability of the ice sheets, which of course, if they melt, I think the oceans will rise, predicted up to about 7 feet. Already, about 1/3 of the refugees in the past century were due to climate change. And that's why the US military sees climate change as a conflict amplifier. All those people, the Syrian farmers that came into Damascus because of the drought, that caused a lot of political instability and led to some of Assad's punishment to try to keep things stable. Bill McKibben, I'm sure most of you have heard about him, said that even if the world can run on solar and wind, we still have an essentially broken planet. In a December 2024 article, this I read a couple of weeks ago, it presented new research that looked at the effects of climate disasters over the last decades. And they found that after an event, if you looked at the stress and financial hardship, pollution, long-term disease, and premature deaths, that the effects were a lot worse. For example, the direct toll of tropical cyclones showed that each one cyclone killed 24 individuals on the average, but expanding this to the indirect deaths put the toll closer to 7,170 to 11,430 for each event on the average. So from 24 killed to between 7 and 11,000 deaths from other causes. So there were 24 climate disasters in the US last year that cost over $1 billion each. Hurricane Helene caused $150 billion of damage this year. And what's happening is that the insurance companies are pulling out of places like California and Florida because they can't make money anymore. So that means that the US government / US taxpayers are going to have to provide insurance, because if you can't insure a house, you can't get a mortgage. And if you don't have a viable housing market, then it's going to severely affect our economy. So this is all bad news. Like I said, I'm setting you up for what we can do about it later on. So there's some of the flood damage that we're talking about. The Intergovernmental Panel, there's one who talked about, gave us all these figures on saying that if we don't act soon enough and strongly enough, that we may not be able to prevent irreversible damage. On the next slide, there's my man. All right, so this is James Hansen, 1988. He was the first lead scientist to testify before the United States Senate about the link between carbon dioxide and climate change. So the way I think of it, it's like you were diagnosed with cancer 34 years ago, and you're just beginning to take serious ways of dealing with it, but it's already gone malignant. So you could keep on smoking like a fiend, or you could stop smoking, but you could stop smoking by 2050, but the cancer's already pretty well advanced. And the longer you wait, the harder it is to deal with. So 1988, that's like I said, 34 years ago, we got these warnings. ExxonMobil in the early 1980s asked a group of their scientists to look at carbon dioxide, how it could affect the atmosphere. And what do you know? These scientists for ExxonMobil said that their predictions were pretty close to what we have today. So Exxon put the kibosh on their research, and by the end of the 1980s, they were paying advertising agencies to confuse the public about the effects of carbon dioxide and climate change. They hired one of the same companies that Philip Morris Tobacco had hired after the US Surgeon General's report in 1992 that said that secondhand smoking could cause cancer. And this ad agency that Philip Morris hired was trying to create doubt about the Surgeon General's results. And in 2005, the British Royal Society criticized ExxonMobil for funding groups to misrepresent the facts about climate change. So here we have the fossil fuel industry that's been making a profit of 26 billion a year for several years now, having the money to funding things like the Heartland Institute and political campaigns and so on for climate change deniers. And that's what we're up against. Changing the energy systems take a long time. It's very expensive. So we're up against the Koch brothers, the American Legislative Exchange, ALEC, as I mentioned, the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court had that gave corporations the right to be treated like a person and donate money to political campaigns. We have young Supreme Court members that are in support of big corporations, and we have a polarized society. So here's one of my first big thoughts about Jung. I'm so glad I'm a Jungian analyst and an environmentalist. I think Jungian ecopsychology, for me, is the most comprehensive way of looking at environmental issues. With a Jungian approach and looking at things archetypally, you can move big pieces around very easily. And one of the concepts that I picked up on Jung is his statement about the dangers of big things. He mentioned big militaries, big governments, and so on. He said these were the modern day monsters and dragons. So the particular example used, he said, imagine how the little merchant felt when he was gobbled up by the Standard Oil Trust. Well, I say then Jung would see the biggest monster on the planet right now is the corporate model. So think of what a corporation is. It's there to make money for the shareholders. The time frame is not the seventh generation like Native Americans think about it. It's the quarterly profit report. People are expendable, and the environment is a resource base and a waste dump. So instead of the environment being at the center of your economic system, it's a resource base and a waste dump. And this has to change if we have. So this is, you want to change the slide. There's such an ugly image. But I wanted to put something pretty ugly up there. I showed this in China. And they didn't put that image up on the screen. As an aside, what's the latest corporate monster that's in the news? It's the healthcare system. That assassination of the CEO of United Healthcare and all the comments that are coming out of the woodwork about our healthcare system. So if you think one way to talk about the healthcare system is that it illustrates what some have called societal murder or structural murder. So instead of out and out killing, You have systems that create violence by denying the conditions to live with. So in this case, adequate health care. A lot of people die because they just don't get health care or they don't have any insurance to begin with. So we are really living with cognitive dissonance. We have to admit the baseline immorality that we are living with in healthcare and with the environment. So change will be difficult. The corporations are modern day monsters. Money talks. Let's look at how young people are responding to climate change. Quite frankly, I've given up on my generation. I'm devoting my energies to addressing young people. Where are young people right now? Here's a 2022 survey that came out, University of Bath in England. 10,000 people, young people ages 16 to 25, 4 continents. Here are the results. 2/3 of them were sad, afraid, and anxious about climate change. That's 66%. Half of them felt angry, helpless. The future would be frightening, and humanity would be doomed. Half of the young people think that humanity is doomed. Of course, would be them too. 4 out of 10 don't want to bring children into the world. 2/3 of them felt the government was lying to them about the effectiveness of government actions to combat climate change, leading them feeling sad and betrayed. And they should feel that way, because this has been, like I said, lead scientists testified to the Senate in 1988, and we haven't taken action soon enough to prevent this exponential increase. There are other significant environmental issues that I'll just mention in passing. The loss of agricultural land, our aquifers being mined, like the Guala in the American West, the Brazilian rainforest loss, steep decline in fish populations, the extinction of species, what's being called the 6th extinction, and the use of antibiotics in the meat industry, the concentrated animal feedlot organizations. So when you cram together this many chickens, the only way you can do that is to try to upset one of nature's way of balancing populations, keeping them from getting too large, is disease. So you have to feed these animals in whatever concentrated rearing situations you have to feed them antibiotics all the time. These are the same antibiotics humans use. So the resistance to the antibiotics is increasing. Let's be honest then. This is leading to what many are calling the Anthropocene era. And as a pathologist, I think of it this way. Humans are like a cancer on the planet. So what is cancer? Cancer is some type of a mutation in some cells that then cause those cells to proliferate out of relationship to the organism and the interrelated, interconnected activity of all the organism. It sucks up all the resources in that system for itself, just to feed the cancer cells, so the other organs start to die off. That's what cancer is. And humans, is the way we are on the planet now. We're kind of like a cancer species with regard to the rest of the living net of things. Advertising, which is Hermes' domain, drives our consumer culture by trying to convince us that we can buy happiness and well-being. All you need is your Visa card. And if everybody lived the way and consumed the way Americans do, we would need 6 planet Earths. Some of the good news, though, is that our laws and systems are like a virus or computer software. They were created by humans. They can be changed by humans. But when you think of trying to do that, just here in America and the political climate and polarization, that makes it extremely difficult to do. I got this idea from Hillman. He said, the pathologies in the environment will make us aware that we're part of the environment, because if we can mess it up so much that it affects us, we must be part of it. Now, that's kind of perverse reasoning, but it's true. And my point is that we will be forced to look at ourselves as being part of the environment. That'll be an ecological concept. And then we take that ecological concept down through all of our systems: political, economic, social, spiritual, psychological. So that's one way that we can frame it. The scientists have been suffering from the Cassandra complex for a long time. Cassandra was it's a Greek myth about a woman that had offended one of the gods. And her punishment was she could see what was going to happen in the future, but no one would believe her. And that's the way Hansen and many people like myself have been feeling for a long time. So changing the course of our present direction will be like changing the course of the Titanic. A little bit of humor here. The Onion magazine started in Madison, Wisconsin. Headline: World's largest metaphor hits iceberg. Titanic, representation of man's hubris, sinks in North Atlantic. 1,500 die in symbolic tragedy. So I have to watch Stephen Colbert once in a while. It's humor and tragedy are too closely related. So where is the field of psychology at this time? And our good man, James Hillman, hit the nail on the head. We've had 100 years of psychotherapy, and the world's getting worse. The problem remains, even in Jungian circles, that our focus is on humans, human-to-human interaction. We're so fascinating, so complex compared to the rest of the world, and people living in urban environments especially. We've been able to forget about the environment. So psychology has not been addressing this issue. And for many reasons that I'll go over, we humans don't see ourselves as part of nature. That's why in the 1990s, a new field of psychology started to emerge called eco-psychology. And this is one of the one of the early texts that I really like: Eco-Psychology, Restoring the Earth, Healing the Mind. And one of my favorite early books, Ecological Psychology, Healing the Split Between Planet and Self, by Deborah Dunan Winter. So ecology then is about the definition will be the study of the movement of energy between the organic and the inorganic realms, illustrating the interrelationship between the individual elements and between individuals and systems. I call it the psychology of ecology and the ecology of psychology. Eco-psychology is about the movement of energy in relational processes that extends from within the psyche to social interactions and the environment. Eco-psychology, I say, starts within ourselves. If you think of a dream that you're in and several other people, the dream is about the interrelationship of you and the others in the dream. Your dream ego is closest to your conscious state. That's an ecology. That's a system of relationships. So ecology the concept starts within our dream world. So eco-psychology explores how our attitudes, values, beliefs, and perceptions and actions affect the world, and our image of ourselves as humans and of nature affects our relationships to nature. Hillman went on and on about this, about the ego. And his concept of the ego, he said, we should think of ourselves more like a beehive, where there's kind of the queen is kind of in charge, but not really. It's an interactive relationship. Richard Schwartz, Northwestern University, called internal family systems, talk about our internal tribe. That's what Jung meant about the little people within and needing to be in good relationship. If we're not in good relationship with the people within, we're not in good relationship with the people without, and we can extend that concept throughout our political and economic systems and even spiritual systems, as I'll talk about later. So eco-psychology explores the many dimensions of our dysfunctional relationship with nature and how we can deepen our connection with nature, and that I'll talk about later. The concept is that the health of the planet and the individual are inextricably linked. A good connection between the two, healing for both. And it's important how we educate about the human-nature relationship, and that requires an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach. Several years ago, I attended an environmental conference in Madison, and one of the Native Americans from Michigan said, there's not a genetic difference between kind of you white guys and the Indians in terms of relating to the environment. It's how we educate our children. So sustainability, and we're looking for sustainability at the psychological, social, and environmental levels. And Fisher, one of the more radical eco-psychologists, said eco-psychology is at the center of a multidisciplinary approach to radically restructure our social, economic, and cultural systems in order to live ecologically and sustainably. I think Jungian eco-psychology, like I said, is one of the best frameworks for examining our dysfunctional relationship with the environment and with ideas on how to go forward. That's why I called my second volume, The Cry of Merlin, Jung, the Prototypical Eco-Psychologist. So I've given you all this depressing information to set you up for what I think, what I've been talking about as the main concept that we need going forward. And that's Jung's idea of a paradigm shift. In 1940, Jung thought we were entering the first meridian of the age of Aquarius. He coined the terms age of Aquarius and New Age in 1940. That was the name for a paradigm shift that he felt had to come to the West and countries affected by the West, which now, of course, includes the whole world. Jung's psychological system evolved out of his deep connection to the land. There's Aquarius, a constellation, and as far as Jung could get, closing statements in Memories, Dreams, Reflections that was published after his death was that Aquarius, which is the water bearer, it's not the water. It can consciously decide where to pour the water, in other words, where to direct emotional energy. Jung saw the age of Aquarius was going to be, you have to think of his definition of enlightenment. He said, enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but bringing as much light of consciousness as possible into the unconscious. So here Jung saw Aquarius pouring water into the mouth of the southern fish as a symbol of the collective unconscious. So that's what we're going to look at next. We're going to look at Jung's idea of the layers of the collective unconscious, each layer for how it contributes to our dysfunctional relationship with the environment. Jung spent late in his life up to half his time at Bolton. That was his retreat at the lower part of Lake Zurich. Started with that little tower on the left and had 3 other phases in his life. He kept adding to it for that complete tower on the right, the lower tower, the initial tower is on the left. And I went down there once, jumped over the wall and went into the courtyard. They even had a stump up against the wall. So many people that tried to climb it. I think they wanted to prevent Jungian people interested in Jung from breaking their necks. And Jung was phenomenal. I think he is the psychologist for the 21st century and forward. This is him sitting beside the lake, and he would get down there and he would spend up to 3 days going down there. This place with no running water, heat or electricity, certainly no telephone or cell phone. He would spend up to 3 days at the foot of the lake with the Swiss Alps to the south, just gazing at the lake or chopping wood and so on, just to clear his mind. Then he went to these deep spaces and looked far into the future. What is particularly important is Jung's identity he felt with Merlin. Jung felt that Merlin was the hero of the Grail legend, and that began to emerge the latter part of the Middle Ages. And Jung made a comment, I think, in the face-to-face interview in 1959 for BBC TV, that we've not evolved past the latter part of the Middle Ages. He was referring to Merlin. So here's a story about Merlin. Merlin was a druidic shaman, and he was conceived by the devil's attempt to imitate the pregnancy of the Virgin Mary. So the devil impregnated a virgin. Merlin was the result. So we're talking about paganism, because the devil got associated with the god Pan, and Pan became the image for the devil, the goat god Pan, the god of nature, and so on. But Merlin was prevented from getting into his really maleficent ways by being tutored by a monk. He got so frustrated in trying to advise King Arthur and the Christian knights and kings, he just disappeared. One of the many legends is he disappeared into the woods, and only occasionally you will hear the cry of Merlin, which is hard to understand. Well, Jung's fantasy, there are many ways, and I go into that in my book, volume 2, that there are many ways he associated himself with Merlin. And one of the things he said, when Merlin disappears, he goes to Bollingen. And he wanted to carve some image for Merlin into that cubic stone into the center of the courtyard down at Bollingen. That's how strongly he felt about it. Now, here's the thing. He said that Merlin's secret was carried by the alchemist, primarily in the form of Mercurius Hermes, and that was taken up by his psychology. And Jung said Merlin represents, quote, the actual solution of the problem of opposites, end of quote. And it's an important aspect of the New Age that I'll get into shortly. So one of Jung's main challenges to Christianity for the New Age was to integrate the pagan side that they had been suppressing and trying to exterminate for a long time. And his challenge was, for modern men and women, one of the biggest challenges he gave us was to integrate our cultured side, which includes a science, with what he called the 2-million-year-old man within. This is Jung's favorite photo of himself, not dressed up in a suit, but standing beside Lake Zurich with his pipe and his pants probably held up by a rope instead of a belt. So here are some of Jung's quotes. It says, natural life is the nourishing soil of the soul. Nature is not matter only. She is also spirit. The earth has a soul. Do you think that somewhere we are not in nature? That we are different from nature? No, we are in nature and we think exactly like nature. So for me, the idea of the organism, which in scientific terms includes atoms, galaxies, human organisms, and so on. And the dynamics of that are described by quantum mechanics, some complexity theory. That's how we are exactly like nature. Our dreaming brain operates on the principles of complexity theory. Next quote, I am fully committed to the idea that human existence should be rooted in the earth. Nature must not win the game, but she cannot lose. Even if we make life so miserable that our civilizations collapse and we destroy half the other species on the planet, planet's still going to be here. There's still going to be cockroaches eating dead things and so on. So she can't lose it, but she must not win. It must not defeat us, but no way nature is going to lose. The second most significant concept from Jung is his idea of alchemy. And this is a slide I took at the Pharmaceutical Museum in Basel. It's a mock-up of an alchemical lab. So Jung saw the alchemist as the first modern depth psychologist in secret, because this was highly heretical. They were projecting the post-Christian unconscious into their retorts and vessels. They were working with chemistry before chemistry evolved, and alchemy flourished from early Christianity up until the beginning of chemistry in the 17th century. So they were looking at all these transformations. They were heating things up. They're putting all different sorts of things in there. They were doing active imagination. They were dreaming about it and so on. So they were seeing couples mating, animals eating each other, and all sorts of things in their fantasies. This was the stuff that Christianity had rejected, suppressed, denigrated, and so on. This was coming back through the collective unconscious of the alchemists and their projections of the collective unconscious into the container, the alchemical vessels. And what they believed was that Christ had saved the microcosm, the human soul. They were trying to re-sanctify the macrocosm, nature. So this leads us to thinking about an indigenous worldview where nature is sacred. This was happening with the alchemists, and this is what Jung meant for uniting our cultured side with the 2 million-year-old man within, getting back to a sense of the sacred in nature. One of the things he meant by that. So eco-psychologists then, they ask for the deepest possible analysis and understanding of our dysfunctional relationship with the environment. And this is a quote by Jung that can lead us in that direction. Jung said, man has always lived with a myth. And we think we're able to be born today and to live in no myth without history. That is a disease. That's absolutely abnormal, because man is not born every day. He is born once in a specific historical setting with specific historical qualities, and therefore he is only complete when he has no relation to these things. You know, this is he, she, humans, of course, should be put in here. To wipe out the connection with the past is a mutilation of the human being. So when you don't know your history, and what I'm saying and what Jungian saying, when you don't know, in the broadest sense, the evolution of your religious system, that's the one that I'm familiar with and what's the dominant religion in the West, Christianity, when you don't know the evolution of that system and how it has affected your relationship with the environment, that's a disease. When you don't know how the evolution of your cultural history in America and its connection to the land and what you did to the Indians, that's a disease. That's how I interpret it. What I have found most helpful, and I don't know if there's any other Jungians that emphasize Jung's idea of the collective unconscious as much as I do. One of the reasons I do it is so many people, and I always kind of have an ear for how academia looks at Jungian psychology. And they think he's a mystic and they dismiss him, and the collective unconscious, very mysterious. But if you break it down this way, no, it really helps us understand our culture and ourselves in the culture at all these many levels. So this is a diagram of the layers of the collective unconscious, and the white part at top, that's consciousness. And then below that line with the dots, that's collective unconscious. So the very peak of all those kind of three mountains, if you think of them like like Hawaii, like mountains in the middle of the ocean. The very peak is an individual ego, an individual in that culture. So all those layers are to be thought of as continually interacting and affecting each other. It's not a museum. So let's look at these layers one by one. So at the top, at the individual layer, in terms of our dysfunctional relationship with the environment, where we start is the individual relationship to the little people within that I mentioned before. And projection of dysfunctional things in there leads to racism, sexism, the enemy as the political other, and so on. Then at the family level, that's what this slide is. The attachment issues, for those that are very familiar with attachment theory in psychology, that if there's a poor attachment between the infant and the mother, it sets it up for an insecure ego, and that can generate anxiety, emptiness, and a narcissism that can lead to consumerism and fundamentalist religions that prey on that emptiness. The archetypal image for the ideal mother and child, of course, is the Madonna and child. The Catholics got that one nailed. The next level, the national level of the collective unconscious. And here's where we can distinguish between Americans and the Europeans. So in America, we have this national myth of the American cowboy going back to when there was the Wild West out there on the plains just with his horse, no government interference, just you and the cows. And this has led to a conquering attitude and a hyper independence and a belief in progress. Also, the American myth of exceptionalism. These Puritans that came over and the Pilgrims, they imagined they were coming over to the shining white city on the hill, an image from a book of Revelation in the Bible. And our special relationship with God was justified for eliminating the heathen savages to bring about progress to these stagnant Indians. They were just going around in cycles. Apologies for the quality of this, but here's the American myth, the American flag. Go west, young man, there on the upper right. And then Custer and Custer's Last Stand and so on, the myth of the frontiers. The deeper level, now we get into the Western cultural unconscious, dominated by two myths. One is the Oedipal myth, and that is human intelligence will trump the great goddess of life and nature that was imaged as the Sphinx. So Oedipus, it was predicted that he would have incest with his mother, so he was hidden off into the wilderness, discovered by some shepherds or something, survived, did end up killing his father, mating with his mother, and then the plague of thieves were inflicted upon humankind anyway. So that's human intellect. She gave him a riddle that he had to solve or would be killed. So human intellect, he solved the riddle, she disappeared. But that didn't conquer nature. It went underground and came back to haunt us. The eco-theologian Thomas Berry described the myth of the West, the doctrine of progress, coming out of the book of Revelation. I call the book of Revelation a psychotic nightmare. In the book of Revelation, it talked about 1,000 years of abundance and human perfection that was supposed to precede the end of the created world. But when that didn't manifest by the grace of God, Thomas Berry said, then humans tried to bring about this promised state through their own efforts by exploiting the resources of the earth. Christianity became more otherworldly during the Great Plague. Like, get us out of here. Because that killed off about half of Europe's population during the mid-1300s. Another significant layer of the Western cultural unconscious is the Cartesian Newtonian worldview. And there's the French philosopher Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Humans are the only ones that have a spirit, no emotions and so on in animals. That's where he came from. Newtonian worldview. So this worldview that began to emerge in the 17th century, remember that was when chemistry began to emerge. That was the beginning of the end for alchemy. You couple that with the subsequent rise of capitalism, industrialization, and the modern corporation. These are some of the major factors that have led to our dysfunctional relationship with nature. And the belief is that humans are separate from an environment that is dead and inert. Nature can and should be controlled, and individuals have a right to maximize economic gain, and progress equals growth. The next level of the collective unconscious gets down to something that all cultures have in common. All cultures, including the Chinese and Indians, Indians, have indigenous roots. And this is what Jung called our primeval ancestors at the clan and tribal levels. Our species is about 300,000 years old, and 290,000 of that, we were hunter-gatherers. That's how our species existed for a great period of time. So it was only after the last ice age and mutation in corn, rice, and wheat, and the beginning of agriculture that we had more concentrated populations. The indigenous cultures believed in spirit animals as an essential expression of their being. This, to Jung, illustrates how close the human psyche is to what he called the animal ancestor foundation in our psyche. Jung's challenge then was to unite with the indigenous one within, or the 2 million-year-old man. That's also been called the totemic self, from our Paleolithic years that were marked by totems that expressed a kinship with the greater than human world. You probably heard of E.O. Wilson using the term biophilia for our innate emotional connection with nature, and Theodore Roszak talking about an ecological unconscious functioning on the principles of the biosphere. The eco-psychologists admire indigenous cultures. They're kind of the exemplars for living in a sacred relationship with nature, practicing reciprocity with each other and with nature, living in small groups with a democratic process, being rooted to the place called topophilia, and they believed in synchronicity. And Jung said, you're not going to have a complete worldview without the concept of synchronicity. Another aspect of that is that saying it takes a village to raise a child. And what we have now is nuclear families, and I say that's how you get nuclear explosion. If you have everything reduced pretty much to a family, and there's abuse, emotional, sexual, whatever, nobody else may know about that. But you're not going to get away with that in a tribe. You have the whole tribe seeing what's happening in other. If things aren't going well in your TP, you hang out in somebody else's TP. You have everybody looking out for each other, but that doesn't happen in nuclear families. The other thing is that psychologists, neurobiologists think that the human brain is so large, is we have to assess whether the humans we're interacting with can be trusted, if they're going to kill us or rip us off in some way. And we can only know about 150 people well enough to be able to trust them. Once you get beyond 150 people, remember, for most of our existence, we were tribes and clans. Once you get above 150 people, then you got to get into belief systems, into religions, or ideologies like communism. And as the populations get larger, they have to morph into more complex systems to handle the stresses of the systems below them. And this is one of the beautiful ways Jungians have to relate to indigenous cultures. I've had the good fortune, as was mentioned in the introduction, of being able to work with, because of a dear friend of mine, Fred Gustafson, Native American spirituality. I've been doing sweat lodges for 36 years. And I wrote an article on that and I can send it to you if you're interested. Reflections on 36 years of participation in Lakota Sioux sweat lodges. And Vine Deloria Jr., one of the big Native American philosophers and writers, was a big admirer of Jung. And this book was published posthumously called C.G. Jung and the Sioux Traditions. And he opened by legitimately criticizing for the many dumb and racist things he said. He got that out of the way. But to his credit, he realized that beneath Jung's persona, namely the collected works and everything else, he realized how much Jung was trapped in his Western culture. But he saw at Jung's heart and soul, he had an indigenous soul. By comments like in 1924, he came to America and visited Taos Pueblo tribe and met Mountain Lake, one of the spokespersons for that tribe, and it's talked about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And late in Jung's life, he held up Mountain Lake as an example of somebody with an advanced consciousness, similar to an Egyptian priest 1300 BCE. And he said that Jungian psychology, because of things like Jung's emphasis on dreams, visions, and synchronicity, is the best Western bridge to the indigenous world. And we see that in therapy with Dora Call. If you haven't seen the video, and I can send your organizers links to all of these things, there's a video of her illustrating sand play therapy, following the sand trays of one boy in particular. She claims that these kids that she works with, they go through the surface issues like bedwetting and not getting on well in school and so on. They work through that in the sand trays, and then they come down to a level of like the animal ancestors. You can see it in the sand tray. And from that platform, they come out to build a healthy psyche. That is illustrated in her work. But you can see I've been thinking about this for a long time.
Something about what you said made me think this thought was basically that, like a homeless schizophrenic person, I've kind of always been fascinated with how they're able to exist in, let's say, a city urban environment without getting in too much trouble, things like that. And for some reason, I've always just thought that that ability of the person who's not in society to survive and not get arrested, find enough food, find enough water. It fascinated me, and I kind of think that they're almost like a one-person pre-agricultural society, and that might explain their ability to just sort of plug into the environment. And they're sort of animalistic, sort of animistic. That they like places, maybe even worship in a sense like that. I was curious your thoughts about that as it relates to the human's natural relationship with the environment. And then the other thing is, I was just curious your answer to this question. Do you think there would be no Protestant Reformation if it hadn't happened, that the plague, if the plague hadn't happened, would there have been a Protestant Reformation, or would Catholicism still be the preeminent religion of Europe because of the disconnect that happened presumably during the plague?
Oh, okay. When you mentioned the schizophrenics and so on, there was a movie, I think back in the 60s or 70s, I think it was called The King of Hearts. And it was about an army that had come through and kind of destroyed the town and then moved out, and all the prisoners and insane asylums were opened up. And it relates to, I think it was R.D. Lang back in the 60s and 70s, who said, who are the sane people in an insane culture, right? I mean, if you look at where we are now in this culture, who are the sane people? Are they the so-called crazies, or are they the people running the culture or running the corporations and so on? in terms of the homeless people, yeah, they can survive, but it's brutal. The problem with schizophrenia, one of the definitions or description I've heard, it's like being in a psychotic nightmare that you can't awake from. And I think it's helpful to think about Jung. He knew on the confrontation with the unconscious starting after the split with Freud. I mean, he really went off the deep end. Probably saved because of that relationship he had with Tony Wolfe. It was like his second wife. And one of the thoughts that Deidre Baer presented in her beautiful biography of Jung was that Emma Jung may have tolerated that because she knew her husband was in some dark places. And Jung knew he was in the realm of the insane. And he just barely held on for various reasons. But linked to what I was just talking about, shamans, the shamans get into that realm that can be outside of space and time. And they're able to come back out. Their ceremonies, their songs, their rituals, their death song, and so on can help them get in, but equally important, come back out. So getting back to the homeless person, I mean, we have a lot of them here in Milwaukee. And being a homeless person in Chicago or Milwaukee is brutal in winter. So they just barely survive. And they do have shelters. They do have places where they can go. They still have like a society that they depend on. So I don't see it very much connected. Where I do see things that happening more, and I see it in rural Wisconsin. You go off on some of these rural roads, and there are people out there living in trailers or just minimal places. They're pretty much off the grid. And how they're surviving on the land with their chickens and maybe a few pigs and so on. And maybe the mushrooms they're getting from the forest. I mean, that may be a little more along the lines of what you're talking about. The other thing with the plague and the Reformation. Now, my understanding, I didn't have any spiritual upbringing. My parents were agnostic at best, which was kind of unusual in rural Wisconsin in the 1950s. And I'm glad I didn't, because I've had enough Catholics and Protestants in my practice that really have had a number done on them by religion. But so I started with a Missouri Synod Lutheran, and they were pretty anti-Catholic. Got in some big arguments with a Catholic friend in the 8th grade. I started reading the Bible in the 7th grade. And my understanding is that the church had gotten so corrupt that they were collecting money to, I think, make some big addition to the Vatican. And they were charging for to help get people out of purgatory or something. You'd pay so much, and the priest is supposedly going to pay for you. And that's one of the things Martin Luther objected to. And he also objected to having to have a priest between you and God. So with the Gutenberg press, that was what a big help to the Reformation. You had the press for the first time that could get all this information. So instead of only having monks with the education and copying things by hand, you could get your information out to people that could read. And these were big factors: the corruption of the church, the press, and the more democratic idea. You have this kind of state religion, and you're protesting that. My background is half Czech, so I'm interested in the fact that Jan Hus in Prague preceded Martin Luther by about 100 years, and he got burned at the stake in Constance. And that image of the flame in a vessel is the image for the Unitarians, and that flame is in honor of Jan Hus. So I have been long interested in the idea of the Reformation, but tying it back to what I was just presenting, Protestantism is probably worse than Catholicism in terms of the connection with the environment. At least the Catholics have had ceremonies where they would go out and bless the field and bless the animals and stuff like that. One of the sayings in Zurich, I'm trying to remember how it goes. The unconscious of the Protestant is Catholic. And unconscious of the Protestant is Jewish. The unconscious of the Jew is Catholic, and the unconscious of the Catholic is pagan, something like that. And Catholicism in South America, much thinner veneer over paganism than in North America. We did quite a number on the indigenous cultures here in America, but in South America, there's enough jungles and places where a lot of these things and ceremonies have survived pretty intact. I mean, we forbid the sun dance and things like that, I think, until the 1970s here in America. It just barely survived. But I think you have much more intact cultures there. Did I answer your question on that? I don't know how many other
Yeah,
questions.
sure. I mean, it also added gave me a lot to think about. So thank you.
Okay. Any other?
I'd like to go.
questions?
I'd like to go to that Vine Deloria book,
Mhm.
and I've studied a lot of things of Native American Lakota culture. The preeminent one being Black Elk Speaks, and Black Elk goes out and has spirit quests. And my understanding of that culture is you can't really be a full-fledged member of it until you've gone and had your spirit quest. And so maybe you could comment on then the analogy between that and Jung and studying of dreams and going into the subconscious. Are those two analogous? Because I never made that connection before. Is that what you're sort of saying there?
That's my next part of the presentation.
Okay, I'll wait for my answer then.
That gets into the positive things we can do using Jungian psychology. Yep.
Okay, good.
During the break, I put some honey on a piece of bread. This was that the dairy farm I grew up on. They kept it as a family dairy farm until the woman who did most of the milking couldn't find any people to come out and help milk anymore. Most of the farm workers in Wisconsin are Latinos. It's hard to get white people to dairy farm anymore. You got to be there every day of the year, morning and night, to milk the cows. But anyway, she has organic honey, and she gave me a pint. I went up there to collect some yarrow for the I Ching about a month ago. And this woman had gone around the planet certifying organic chocolate growers and things like that. So it was a nice heritage and some good honey that I got from her. So then, to continue, now we're going to look at the many ways that Jungian psychology can address the issues about our poor relationship to the environment and what we can do going forward. I start as a biologist being so impressed with Jung's reverence for the animal world. James Hillman talked about the ability for dreams to immerse us in what he called zoological cathedrals. And Jung felt there was an animal soul at the foundation of human life, associated mostly with instincts and animal drives, especially sexuality. And he believed the loss of animals in creeds and symbols, religious symbols, marked, quote, the beginning of the dissociation between religion and nature, end of quote, and the loss of the life and power of the symbols. He advocated loving thy neighbor be extended to the animals as well, to the animal in us, loving the animal in us. To be truly human, Jung believed, and to reach our unique potential, we have to be in relationship with animals. So that's done in the outer way in our relationship with animals, but also, as Jung saw it, to be intimate in our relationship with the collective unconscious, coming to terms with the animals in our inheritance. Jung said, he said, whenever we touch nature, we get clean. People who have got dirty from too much civilization take a walk in the woods or a bath in the sea. This is from the outside, entering the unconscious, entering through dreams. That's from one of my favorite painters, Susan Boulay. And she, women especially, would have her paint spirit animals for them and so on. This is about the dream world and entering the unconscious and getting in touch with the animal zoological cathedrals. I said, entering the unconscious, entering yourself through dreams is touching nature from the inside. And this is the same thing. Things are put right again. So this is biophilia long before E.O. Wilson talked about it. And the way I present it is that the deepest disturbance in our collective unconscious is at the animal soul level. Because for the first time in the history of life on Earth, one species, namely ourselves, is going to take down 30 to 50% of the other species. And through the consequences of climate change and other environmental damage, we will decimate the basic requirements for our life as an animal: food, water, shelter, floods, and so on, and a relatively stable environment. As I said before, climatologists are concerned about getting above 1.5 degrees because this has not happened since our species has been on the planet. There's another Susan Boulay, and you can see the spirit animals in there, just beautifully done. As Jung said, we can reach the indigenous one within and the animal ancestors through our dreams. Jungians place a great deal of emphasis on dream work, especially big dreams. And I'm going to be talking how we can use that to connect us to the environment. And Jung talked about dreams as being part of nature. He said that dreams are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside the control of the will. They are pure nature. They show us the unvarnished natural truth and are therefore fitted as nothing else is. They give us back an attitude that accords with our basic human nature when our consciousness has strayed too far from its foundations and run into an impasse. So what Jung meant about straying from our natural foundations are the things that I went through, going through the layers of the collective unconscious, how our personal and family and national and Western cultural unconscious have led us to a disconnect with nature. That includes the rise of capitalism, the corporate model, industrialization, etc. Those are all things that have removed us from this basic connection in nature that indigenous peoples still feel. And this is my favorite quote about the generative forces of the universe. Von Franz said, "At the source of the dream, there is a creative mystery which we cannot rationally explain. It's the creativity of nature. It's the same creativity which has created what man could never invent, the millions of species of animals and flowers and plants on the earth. The dreams are also like flowers or plants. They are something unique which we can only marvel at." So that idea of dreams being a pure product of nature, I think, is beautiful. And remember, we did not invent our species. We are a product of the creative energy of the universe that started with the Big Bang and eventually cool off enough to produce the solar system, and then planet Earth, and then the first cell, et cetera, and eventually humans. So the generative energies as experienced here on planet Earth have produced matter that is conscious of itself and created a species that can have spiritual experiences. I could just as easily call this or understand why people say that this is godlike or this is all a result of the spirit. So the model that I use to talk about Jungian eco-psychology, my main model is the Native American vision quest. It's the model that I use for working with big dreams that contain natural phenomena. And how do you frame and talk about those elements in dreams in a sacred way? So I think particularly of the Sioux Indians on the Great Plains, back before they were so crushed by our white culture, that, and it still happens for many of the members of the tribes out there to this day, when a boy reaches puberty, he's put on the hill, as they call it, overseen by the holy man, shaman, interpreter, whatever they call themselves, and praying for them and the family praying for them. They're in a sacred container out on the hill out there with basically a blanket. They're out there for 4 days and nights praying for a vision, no food or water. The way I think of it, you stress the psyche to a breaking point, praying, hoping that when you get reduced to your essence, psyche will give you a spirit animal and or a vision for your life. And that spirit animal, that medicine animal, it's like your personal image of God, if you were to put it into the Christian context. But it's very specific. So there's on the vision quest, it's like a black elk or a sitting bull buffalo or a crazy horse, a spirit horse, or a weather phenomena like a red cloud or a blue thunder, etc. So this is your medicine, both an instructor, both at the physical level, emotional level, spiritual level, dream level, and so on. So there's black elk, and there is the animal in nature. So if you had a vision or a dream or were attacked by an animal and survived it, you could become members of the various lodges in that tribe. And you were to study that animal, hopefully get something from it, a feather or some fur that you would wear at a ceremony, and you would dance that animal and walk in the gait of the animal. You're trying to embody that spirit of that animal. And for Black Elk, just an amazing story. Black Elk Speaks was on our reading list in Zurich. Jung was so fascinated by that because his point always was that religions didn't emerge out of some committee or group decision. They were some vision that an individual had. Their vision was something that answered the collective problem of their group at the time. So they established a following, and then they had the projection of the collective unconscious of that group onto them, onto their individual lives. So it was very holistic at the beginning. Very important point for Jung, this is an aside, that what started off being very holistic, like for Christianity and men and women of all classes and so on, a Roman tax collector, Matthew, one of the four evangelists, as an example, was a member of the early Christian community. They were protesting not only the Roman Empire, but the ossified Jewish culture at that time. So they were really on the outs. But initially, this powerful group, as human consciousness worked the religion over as time went by, we ended up with anti-dogma. And Jung said, even religions age. So for Christianity, for example, don't want to get too political. My perspective only, I'll claim it. The way the fundamentalists and the evangelicals support Trump, a young person looking at that in terms of environmental concerns and women's control of their own bodies, I mean, what are they to think of Christian Protestants, which now outnumber mainstream Christians, looking at Catholicism, which still only has men, namely the cardinals, in the highest circles, and they're still wrestling with pedophilia. So this is the kind of a Christianity coming to kind of a sterile end. And remember that Jung's, one of his main archetypal challenges, he thought, was to revitalize the Christian myth. So to do that, you have to go down to the same source of Buddha and Muhammad and Confucius, and the same source. I think it's easier for me as an environmentalist to think of the same source that people like Black Elk and Crazy Horse went through, that level of the collective unconscious, close to the animal soul level of our psyches. So I think of the spirit animal, you get that with the vision quest being in the same domain as near-death experiences. When applying complexity theory to Jungian ideas, your complex feels like something personal. My father complex. You can have an image of your father and you can think of all the terrible things that your father had done to you. But when that gets really intense, you morph to the other level. And this is how complexity theory describes it. You morph into the archetypal level. When you get into that level, there is a dimension at the extreme with synchronicity that is outside of space and time. And that's when these strange things happen, like you can dream that at 2:05 you woke in the morning and there was grandma at the foot of your bed, and you find out the next day, 1,000 miles away, 2:05 in the morning, grandma died. Synchronicity shows that there's some dimension psyche can get into that is outside of space and time. And that's the dimension you get into on vision quest, near-death experiences, and so on. I just had the good fortune of being introduced to Native American spiritualities to my dear friend, Fred Gustafson. He died a few years ago. Jungian analyst, Lutheran minister, and became a sun dancer. He danced for over 25 years. Our sweat lodge group that formed in Watertown, Wisconsin, that's between Madison and Milwaukee, many of us went out to support him as a dancer. And he wrote a book called Dancing Between Two Worlds. And he did a lot of vision quest, 4-day vision quest. And he said, you feel like you're going to die, think near-death experiences. And powerful synchronistic experiences happen all the time, he said. Now, I only did a 2-day vision quest on the Rosebud, had the good fortune of Elmer running, a powerful medicine man that Vindaloria Jr. mentioned in his book, The Way We Were. It's a compendium of the incredible things shamans used to do. And he put out a challenge to Jungians to say, basically, wrap your mind around this from your framework, see how you can describe, like shamans could use special stones to tell them where they lost their rifle or where some missing cattle could be found. What's all that about? That's a bit of an aside, but you can ask a question about that if you're interested. I got 2 spirit animals in my dreams, one from a shamanism workshop that I got, but what I want to focus on now to illustrate a point is one of many big dreams I had in my last year of training at the Jung Institute in Zurich. And it was of a typical Wisconsin meadow scene, a little bit like this. It had a hayfield in the foreground, And let's face it, I got a doctorate in entomology. So there had to be some insects flying above the hayfield. It was a gently rolling topography, a little bit like this, with trees on the horizon, beautiful summer day, blue sky, puffy white clouds. That was it. But it's the most beautiful landscape I've ever seen because every atom had an inner light. It was a numinous landscape, a sacred landscape. So I was able to travel all over California when I lived out there, went up the Oregon coast, Canadian Rockies, Swiss Alps. I've never seen anything as beautiful as that typical Wisconsin meadow or pasture seed. I don't think the psyche can produce anything more sacred than that. Genetically, we're not different from Native Americans. So what do you do with a dream like that? This is where we can take hints from how indigenous cultures relate to a big dream and from the I Ching. So in the I Ching, hexagram 1, all yang lines related to the heavens. That's inspiration. Hexagram 2 is to, the receptive is to take and be inspired by that hexagram 1, that inspiration, and manifest it in space and time. So you just don't go around bragging, I had this great numinous dream. It's like, no, that is to be like your medicine landscape, is to instruct you, guide you at these many different levels and help make life decisions. So because of that dream, it's one of the reasons after I finished up with Zurich, we didn't go back to California, which my wife wanted to go back to, but we came back to Wisconsin. And since being in Wisconsin, I said, what did I miss growing up here? There's some power in the land, some spirit in the land that I missed. So that's when I started. That's why I did the spirit in the land. I got these Wisconsin people, mostly several Jungian analysts, to talk about what is the spirit in the land, in the seasons, and the weather phenomena, and so on. That's how you manifest a big dream in space and time. And basically that volume 4 land, weather, seasons, insects is like an active imagination, an extended incorporation in space and time of hexagram 1, the big inspiring dream of the sacred meadow. So this is my personal example of how you can use Jungian eco-psychology to meet one of the big challenges from eco-psychologists is how do you connect more deeply to the land and in a sacred way? I say by using big dreams. When you have a big dream, let's say you dream of an animal kind of in a sacred way, animals do not live in a vacuum. If your spirit animal happens to be a grizzly bear, it evolved to live and survive in a particular environment. So what you have to do is immerse yourself in that environment. Just hang out there, visit it, camp in it, do as much as you can to get a feel for it. Your spirit animal is the entree to an ecological system, an ecosystem. So like I said, in my volume 4, to embody that dream, I used science, myths, symbols, dreams, Native American spirituality, imaginal psychology, and the I Ching to illustrate that. And I can send you links to what I did I made a video called Seasons of the Soul, where I use several of these concepts. And the concepts I use from the I Ching were the 4 phases of any cycle of change: spring, growth, harvest, and trial, that Richard Wilhelm in his translation of the Jing called supreme success, furthering, and perseverance, and the yin-yang symbol in relationship to the solstices. So I've taken this concept applied to Wisconsin, and I brought it down to the most local level. Here in Milwaukee County, there is this park called Atwater Park on the shores of Lake Michigan, has native plants. I go there almost every day to exercise. I speed walk that asphalt trail that you see there, and I look at this park and what's in it, including the lake and everything else, the seasons and everything, as if this were my soul. It's the Hillman's idea of Aphrodite as the soul of the world. Aphrodite, the goddess of sexuality, sensuality, and beauty. Thinking of this as my soul, I look at all the individual elements, all the plants and animals, and so all these elements as aspects of my soul. So you look at them, they all have something particular to communicate to you and to say to you. And I've been practicing addressing the flowers and so on when they're in blossom. I say, you look really beautiful today. Talk to them like people. That's the way Hillman is trying to get Jungian psychology out of the office into the world. Do what the alchemists were doing. Try to re-sanctify the world. And to me, the Native American concept of spirit animals, all these plants and animals have spirits. They are just as much survivors as we are. They are, anything alive now is just as successful as we as humans are, but at least they're not destroying everything else on the planet. So this is one of my images. So like when I go there at like 6:35 in the morning in the middle of summer, I say, this is what my soul looks like at this time. Here's another image. I've just finished putting together 2 documentaries on my experiences here in the way that I described it to you for the retirement home here in Milwaukee called St. John's on the Lake. I present the many dimensions of my experience, including the lake, but I have loved clouds since I was a child. So over half of my photos are of clouds. This is the landscape and the seasonal changes there. This is in the fall. I've always been a little puzzled by the fact that when I started reading Jung, so taken by it, I immediately started writing on my dreams and working my dreams. I've always had some ability to work with dreams. And then a few years ago, I read, I don't know how I came across this. Freud said he noticed that there were 2 types of people that were good dream workers. I forget what one of them were, but he said people that like clouds. And I've always been fascinated with clouds. Whenever I find a parking lot, anything that's relatively flat and I can see the sky, I notice what's happening with the clouds. And I make a case in my, I did a big presentation on the I Ching for the Orange County Jung group. And I made a case that clouds are like all those dragons we see on the Chinese robes and paintings. The dragons for them are positive. They're related to the clouds that bring rain and so on. And I think of the clouds as that ever-shifting space between the Tao, which is the origin of the 10,000 things, and the 10,000 things. It's that hermetic space between those 2 dimensions. Anyway, that was a bit of an aside. So when I go to Atwater, I notice that the sounds, the birds, whether they're there or not, especially the red-winged blackbirds, how the sounds change with the direction of the wind change, the sounds that the waves make coming in and so on. And the air temperature will change as soon as that wind starts coming off the lake. You pay attention to all these things. So the sense that you get of the soul is not something stagnant. It's evolving, everything is interconnected. There are seasonal changes, there are phases of the environment, and your psyche goes through, etc. Nature modeling, that's what Jung tried to tell us. Learn from nature what the basic construct of the psyche as you experience it. One of this concept for Hillman that I really liked was Aphrodite as the soul of the world. Here she is in the painting in Florence by Botticelli, The Birth of Venus. This is the local version of that. I was down there one morning. often see photographers taking pictures of like for wedding photos or the birth of a baby or whatever. And there was a photographer taking a picture of this woman with a wedding dress standing at the edge of Lake Michigan at sunrise. So there's my local image of the birth of Aphrodite. Think globally, act locally. Now I'm trying to take these down to the most local level, my backyard. I turned this old dilapidated lawn we had, I didn't like cutting lawn anyway, into a native plant garden. So I sit out there, I have my one beer buzz, good beer, at 4:20 in the afternoon, so I have a good buzz. I record my thoughts. A lot of thoughts come up in time for me to watch my favorite program on PBS, Amanpour and Company. Just these incredible world leaders and so on. She interviews in such great fashion. So I wanted plants tall enough so people in my home office could see it. So I have a lot of cut flowers there. That this is what it looks like outside. I just noticed, speaking of Hermes, there's a squirrel just ran into the brush pile that I put out there so the squirrels and the rabbits could have a place. This is what you can do in the city, and many of these concepts I've talked about, I think about that in my backyard. I sit out there every day, my one beer buzz, good beer, 8.4% alcoholic content, and it just to be in nature and just see all these things happening in the change of seasons. I love it. I wrote about that in my chapter in this book that came out, I think it was this year, Jungian Analysis in a World on Fire. I wrote about my experience in the backyard. Raising consciousness. Jung hammered us about the importance of raising our consciousness, and we all think about that as psychological consciousness. But what I say, it's equally important to recognize how unique our species is in being able to consciously delineate through our science the laws of the universe and then bend them with science and technology and economic systems and everything else to our advantage of our species alone, creating, unfortunately, what is being called the Anthropocene era. The greater consciousness, as I see it, will inevitably include a sensitive awareness of the complex interrelatedness of everything. The environmental pathologies, as I mentioned before, have the potential, if we frame it right, to realize we're part of the environment, how everything is interrelated. Try to find a place where you can experience that yourself. For me, Atwater Park, my backyard with my native plants and so on. And then my thesis is, as I said at the beginning, that the ecological framework for the new age begins with this concept. Corporate power, consumer culture generated by advertising and other aspects led Carl Sagan in 1992 as co-chair of Religion and Science for the Environment to make this statement. The environmental problem has religious as well as scientific dimensions. As scientists, many of us have had a profound experience of awe and reverence before the universe. We understand that what is regarded as sacred is more likely to be treated with care and respect. Our planetary home should be so regarded. Efforts to safeguard and cherish the environment need to be infused with a vision of the sacred. At the same time, a much wider and deeper understanding of science and technology is needed. If we do not understand the problem, it is unlikely we will be able to fix it. Thus, there is a vital need for both science and religion. And the way I frame it is that Apollo is the god of science. Think of the Apollo space shots. But Apollo is only one of 12 gods. Whenever any one god takes up too much space, becomes like a cancer, the other gods or Krishna has to reincarnate or something to take it down. And right now, this materialistic, scientific, consumer way we are in the world is destroying the planet. So the question is, how do we establish, as modern men and women, a sense of the sacred about the environment? This is what I've started to address before. I talked about how this is related to Jung's saying that a major challenge for modern men and women is to unite their cultured side with the indigenous one within, and also Jung's modeling for a reverence for the animal world. Then the work with the meadow dream of how we can use a sacred dream to connect us to the land. And that the land then, the areas where you feel especially connected, that becomes a literal space to cultivate a sense of your soul and to feel your unique place in an interconnected universe. And in this slide, for me, being able to do Lakota Sioux Sweat Lodge or Inipi ceremonies through the many seasons on atop our sweat lodge was for many years atop one of my favorite glacial features, the drumlins. That helps to establish a ritual connection to the land and reminds me again that that's how our species evolved as tribes, and we had these rituals to connect us to nature. I get at least a good introductory sense to what rituals on the land created in the symbolic way using natural materials can help with that process. It's all about complexity of helping put you into that space. Rituals, whatever things you can do, meditation, whatever, we need things to get into that. So we have to find that all those things that work for us as individuals. Another aspect that's been so interesting for me, and you can do this anywhere, but we can even do this in not only in Arizona, but in the upper Midwest, is to recognize and feel connections into nature by having some sense of what the sacred indigenous sites are. And this has been one of my most fabulous discoveries here in Wisconsin, thanks to a dear friend who discovered all these sacred stone arrangements and symbolic expressions on the land south of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, which is a great inland lake at the foot of Lake Winnebago, Fond du Lac, foot of the lake, Winnebago. The French fur traders were the first people in the state. And that fellow on the right is Ralph Red Fox. When I met him, he was the last 4 surviving members of the ancient level of the Cheyenne religion. They were here until 2,000 years ago when their stone alignments and so on to the constellations didn't line up. Then that's when they went out to the Great Plains. Ralph Red Fox came out when a white buffalo calf was born to a white farmer here in Wisconsin several years ago. He had heard about Herman Bender's work. And when Herman showed him what I call this unusual drumlin mandala, that's a drumlin behind him here, these unusual formations within 40 miles of the terminal moraine of a glacier, Ralph Red Fox realized that for many reasons, that was the lost eastern center of the world that he had heard about from his Cheyenne grandparents. And he did a ceremony to acknowledge that several years ago. And here he is standing in front of a drumlin on the farm. You can see the hill sloping from left to right. And these drumlins were huge teardrop-shaped landforms that formed under the glacier within 40 miles of the terminal moraine. And there were many stone arrangements on these drumlins, and one drumlin in particular in the Campbellsport drumlin natural area is what Ralph Red Fox recognized as the lost eastern center. So being able to be on the land and know this history and know something about the symbolism has helped me connect to the ancestors, the indigenous ancestors here. a further response from Jung in dealing with this past Carl Sagan's challenge was for greater consciousness. And Jung said, we need more psychology because we are the source of all coming evil. The new age and going forward, we need a lot more psychological knowledge, especially in this age of Trump and conspiracy theories, and with evangelicals or the fundamentalists operating out of a sense of good and evil. And if you're not on my side, you're the enemy. A democracy cannot work that way. So it's especially important to be aware of our own dark shadow side and not project it. And our species has to learn how to get its act together, how to relate to one another better, because of our dysfunctional relationships. Like wars not only devastate each other, but in the environment. Our military budget is about $1 trillion. We could use this trillion. I think it would take at least $1 trillion a year in this last global climate change conference to begin with reparations and help the countries, especially the island nations, suffering most from the consequences of global warming. So to pick up the challenge then in a Jungian way of the deep ecologist saying we have to analyze the problem at the deepest level. The deepest level is the spiritual foundation of your culture. That's what Jung did by his analysis of the archetypal dynamics of Christianity. So one dimension of archetypes are what are called historical dominance. These are themes that dominate a culture for millennia, like, for example, the Christian attitude toward women. So Jung's deepest analysis was that, think of those astrologers that came from the East to find Jesus in a manger. So think about the different astrological ages so Jung equated the birth of Jesus with the beginning of the age of Pisces. Two fish, think of collective unconscious, swimming in opposite directions. So as Jung saw it, the first 1,000 years was to build up the Christian ego. The next 1,000 years was kind of a decline until the very beginning of the age of Aquarius. Jung thought in 1940 what he called the New Age of Aquarius. This is there's a little secret image in full view on the University of Madison campus that perfectly illustrates the New Age and Age of Aquarius. So for those of you who have been to Madison, this is looking down from the administrative center Bascom Hall, which is on a drumlin, looking toward the state capitol, which was also built on a drumlin. And you go down the hill. So you have your Presbyterian church on the right, next to the big Catholic center looking down the street. You have your political center on your left is the Memorial Library Academic Center. You go into that Memorial Library on the left, and there's another view of the press house on the right, Catholic Center there in the middle. You go inside, and there's this big mural. And I walked in there several times before I realized, oh my God, what's going on here? The artist called it linking the above and below. You see those hooks. Did not mention that figure on the right. So here we see something directly out of the book of Revelation that Jung jumped on. After all that psychotic nightmare and Jesus going around getting revenge on everybody and blood dripping robe and so on, the heavens open and a woman starts to descend. And she's standing on a crescent moon, has the sun on her chest. You can't see it there, but a crown of 12 stars. Jung said a very pagan image. She was pregnant. Next thing, she has a baby in her arms, and she's confronted by a 7-headed dragon. So Yahweh takes the baby up in the heaven, hides the woman in the wilderness, and then the nightmare continues. The artist knew exactly what he was doing. The astrological charts extend across the middle of this mural. It's about 20 feet long, I think, the mural. You see Pisces there on the right, just before the age of Aquarius. And Jung said that this baby represented a consciousness that Christians were not ready for 2,000 years ago. But that consciousness was going to start coming into being in the age of Aquarius. So that's his link from the book of Revelations to the New Age. So from what I've been able to determine, these are 5 main attributes of Jung's New Age. Special role for the feminine. So here's one of my images for a powerful feminine, Nancy Pelosi, applauding Donald Trump after a State of the Union presentation. Another image for that, Greta Thunberg. In terms of archetypal feminine energy coming more to the fore in the New Age. Other aspects, the emergence of new spiritual forms. Boy, we certainly saw that exploding in the 1960s. I always saw the Hare Krishnas on campus. Think of how far we've come, and now there are yoga institutes everywhere, a lot of meditation groups, and that was just coming in. The Beatles, of course, did their part to introduce the Eastern religions to the West. A third, Christian integration of vital elements of the heathenism they'd been persecuting, the end of degradation to the environment, and this is what I put in, painful awareness of the fragmentation within ourselves, our society, and the God image that hopefully will prompt a transcendent function to produce a new whole God image that leads to transformation and psychological growth. So let's remember that these dysfunctional systems were created by humans and can be changed by humans. So I'm going to focus in the remainder of my talk on 2 powerful systems that can be changed. These are some of my thoughts about an Age of Aquarius educational system. And I had thought about trying to introduce this to K through 12 in universities, but that would take so long that when I'm thinking of developing programs myself and with others to get this all online in some uniform form, that we can encourage young people to kind of study these. And these would be some of the elements if I were designing a Jungian eco-psychology program. This I wrote about in my volume 1, Jungian eco-psychology. So one would use Jung's ecological framework, a model of the psyche and the self as an ideal framework, teach useful psychology about the shadow, projection, anima, animus, the self, instruct about archetypes and the evolution of the Western symbol systems as related to Christianity, incorporate a sense of the numinous, use age-appropriate dreams, fairy tales, and movies to engage and educate the students. Great film years ago called The Emerald Forest, great illustration of a vision quest under the influence of psychedelics in South America. Use Native American stories and films at all grade levels. Beginning in the 7th grade, I should have up at high school. I changed that to high school. My son said, that's ridiculous, Dad. At that age, I explore the Greek myths of Hermes, who was worshipped as a phallus and could easily fantasize about sexuality. I wrote that in volume 3. Discuss and show films about Native American vision quest and describe Hermes as the god of complexity theory, alchemy, and the relationship to the unconscious, advertising, business, and eco-psychology. Books that I would use, there are very few books like this. The Passion of the Western Mind traces our Western development from the pre-Socratics all the way up to Jung. Somebody who understands Jung, Parnas was the head of Esalen for many years. At the more local level, nature's metropolis, Chicago in the Great West. I would describe this how Chicago is young, with its industrial base, making agricultural equipment like McCormick, Deering International Harvester, big competitor of John Deere. That's young to the Midwest, natural abundance on the prairies and the forest. So this would be an educational system that integrates sciences, math, and arts. My volume 3, I posit that the myth of Hermes stealing Apollo's cattle illustrates how Hermes personifies really the elements of complexity theory. Then educate about environmental problems at the scientific and mythic levels as it connects us deeply to our local habitat. For example, here in Milwaukee would be my Atwater Beach, and then you can do that in your backyard. Brings together the spirit and the rational, and it would be a system that cultivates relationships, activism, compassion for self, others, and the environment. The other element that I like to focus on a bit is what is called a green economist, and this is a great book for that. Enough is enough, building a sustainable economy in a world of finite resources. There are people working on putting the environment at the center of our economic system instead of at the periphery. And here are some of the points they make. There would be wealth redistribution on a planetary level. There are people thinking like this, limiting population numbers, decreasing working hours by almost half, spreading the work hours around the planet. Equal rights and women's rights are integral to the process of developing a sustainable economy. And consumption rates of Westerners have to be lowered, requiring positive human values being encouraged. Jung said to Bill W., the founder of AA in 1930, you can't just tell people to stop an addiction. You have to have something equally positive to replace it. And I'm saying the Jungian idea of individuation and moving toward wholeness and having a sense of soul, that can replace this consumer sense you can buy happiness and meaning. And my archetypal framework from this is right out of the I Ching. Hexagram 42, which is called increase. It talks about this hexagram increase evolving out of this hexagram called standstill, hexagram 12. There you see 3 yang lines on the top, 3 yin lines on the bottom. The yang is associated more with archetypal feminine, the spirit, heaven. Its natural movement is up. The yin lines on the bottom more associated with archetypal feminine, the earth. Its natural movement is down. Heaven and earth are out of relationship. The Chinese say that is standstill. Now, if you take that lowest of the upper 3 lines and have it come down to the bottom, that's how you get hexagram 42. Can you see that? Take the lowest on the left, the lowest of the upper 3 lines, bring it down to the bottom, you have hexagram 42. And this is what Wilhelm says about that hexagram. Jung said the Jing was a book of archetypal images. The message is for those in power in whatever form, when it comes down to help the less fortunate, the I Ching says this conception expresses the fundamental idea on which the Book of Changes is based. To rule truly is to serve. A sacrifice of the higher element that produces an increase of the lower is called an out-and-out increase. It indicates the spirit that alone has power to help the world. So this would refer to dealing with income inequality, racism, sexism, political and social inequalities, and healthcare inequalities. A major inequality is our species in relationship to all other species. We must realize how unique we are in bending the laws of nature. And if we control diseases, a natural limiting factor, we must consciously limit our human populations. Editorial comment, religions that don't support that have to change. Time to act. Manifest a new paradigm by thinking in this big dimension. Think ecologically about everything, beginning with your relationship with the little people in your dreams. Realize how unique our species is in being able to totally manipulate nature toward our ends. Educate yourself and work towards designing a holistic, ecologically based educational system. Develop an economic system with the environment at the center. Become more psychologically aware, especially about your shadow. Cultivate a sense of compassion for yourself and others. Cultivate a sense of the sacred in nature. Consider the state of the environment we will be handing over to the youth. Find what your unique contribution is toward becoming a citizen of the planet. Develop your wholeness. Get together with like-minded people to bring about change and become politically active. These are some practices. I'm just going to put it up like one slide at a time because you have the recordings. You can look at it later. Some practical things. I got it from Carl Goldman's Tree of Life website, and nature-oriented practices you can do. For example, mindfulness and contemplative practices. Just going to earthwork and so on. You can look at it later. Nature-based psychological practices, ecotherapy, and ritual and art. That's it. There's the website. The Earth Charter. I love it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. It was launched in 2000. And quote, the Earth Charter is an international declaration of fundamental values and principles created by global consultation process. Mikhail Gorbachev was involved with it, that calls upon humanity to help create a global partnership dedicated to the idea that environmental protection, human rights, equitable human development, and peace are interdependent and indivisible. The Charter attempts to provide a new framework for thinking about and addressing these issues. I can send the links to you. Mary Jane Rust is a British Jungian eco-psychologist, has a great website. And I think back to Lester Brown in his 2006 book, Plan B 2.0. He called for mobilization to address the environmental issues on a scale equivalent to the American mobilization in World War II to convert from domestic production to producing war material. So in summary, in this presentation, I have focused on the unique dimensions Jungian psychology brings to a deep understanding of our dysfunctional relationship with the environment and how we can work in a Jungian manner to connect people more deeply to nature. Nature offers ecological models of interrelatedness and interconnectedness that we must apply to our human systems and relationship, beginning at the intrapsychic level with our relationship to the little people within. We can bring into our therapeutic practice an ecological construct of the psyche at its many levels. And I've been working over the past several years, especially with young people, to see how to introduce this into the therapeutic sessions. And one thing I do, especially the home office, I always comment on what's happening in my backyard. As they look out the window and can see my cut flowers. The sense of a transcendent and archetypal dimension is most significant when we can recognize that what indigenous cultures call spirit animals, what can be seen as the essence of a person, a foundation for their life, and a guiding and healing spirit, a self-image in Jungian terms. We're living in exciting times in relationship to global warming and environmental degradation. In the end, it's up to us. Will we be able to shift the paradigm so we can live sustainably on a green planet? Or will we continue business as usual and literalize the nightmare depicted in the book of Revelation? Thank you. Das ist alles. That's about as brief as I can make about 30 years of my work.
There's a lot. Anyway, go ahead, Elliot.
Great, thank you. I have basically one question, which is, what is it? I mean, my father was an entomologist as well. He was kind of a hippie. He studied pesticides management, alternatives to pesticides, and but my question is basically about, I assume your generation is, with the tools that they had, you know, the baby boomer generation, the hippie movement, things like that. How did that generation fail so miserably to protect things like the environment? I mean, because I know those ideas were ever present in the 70s, let's say. And yet I look back and I see, things like gerrymandering, corporatism thriving at a greater rate than environmentalism over from the 80s to the 2000s. So, I mean, as a deconstruction, I'm just curious what your thought is. How did that generation fail so miserably? I mean, I'm reminded of a friend whose father gave 11% of his income to the Sierra Club and things like that because he wanted to be 1% better than Catholics, right? And but
Love it.
he would be the first to admit that his generation failed in those regards.
Hmm. Yeah, a great question. Yeah, when I was in Berkeley, what was emerging was integrated pest management, not control. So that Berkeley was one of the leaders in that. So as an aside, how did it fail? Just talking personally and from the entomology perspective, when I was at Berkeley, and one of the reasons I went out there, it was the #1 entomology department on the planet. It was the Berkeley Entomology Department, only because it was one of the originals. So here in the Bay Area, you have an entomology department when most of your agriculture in California is in the Central Valley, Davis and so on, Riverside, and somewhat. But the biological control division was there. That's where biological control. So you have these pests that come in from abroad. All their natural enemies are left at home, and they don't have any natural controls here. So Berkeley started biological control when the cottony cushion scale just about wiped out the orange trees in Orange County when Orange County had orange trees. And a Berkeley entomologist thought, wow, this has come from abroad. I wonder if I go to wherever it came from and found out what its natural enemies were. Well, what do you know? It came from Australia, imported the Vidalia beetle that ate only cottony cushion scale. Within 3 years, there was no problem. The only problem we have now with cottony cushion scale, when you spray for something and it kills off the Vidalia beetle. So Van den Bosch had studied what happens with spraying in the Central Valley and found out what caused what he called the getting on the pesticide treadmill. You spray for something, kills off natural enemies of something else, and then you got to spray for that and so on. And he campaigned to keep the pesticide company representatives out of the fields as farm advisors. The Shell chemical companies, for example, had farm advisors as their representative. So they had a bill passed to restrict farm advisors to entomologists and not pesticide. So Van den Bosch saw himself as having a one-man war against Shell Chemical. So here's to begin to answer your question. Shell Chemical put pressure on Ronald Reagan, who was governor at the time, to get rid of Van den Bosch. Well, after I graduated from Berkeley, the whole entomology department disappeared. It no longer exists. And there were entomologists that think it was for political reasons. That stuff got moved to UC Davis. Entomology is now part of integrated environmental studies or something. That's one other way it happened. The power of the fossil fuel companies with Citizens United giving corporations the rights of an individual to donate to political campaigns, it distorts, and then they can set up things like the Heartland Institutes. Hire these people. They're always going to be scientists who are contrarians and have some, you hire, and one of the people that founded Greenpeace spoke at these conferences. So it sounded really legitimate. But these are supported by people like the Koch brothers in the fossil fuel industries. So you get all this money in American politics, very different from British politics. You have to be you have to be on the phone all the time to get money for your campaign ads. So you have to kowtow to whoever has the money out there. And that's one thing that distorts the politics. And then we had the rise of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange, founded by supported largely by the Koch brothers. They come up with these things that really support corporate power. Think of the modern day monster. And here in Wisconsin, we had somebody called Scott Walker, who was trying to go to the right of Donald Trump. You probably don't remember the first Republican debate. Walker was still there. He got money from the Koch brothers, and the states are the petri dishes for what happens in national. So Wisconsin, which had been squeaky clean, we have this incredible environmental record. Gaylord Nelson is from Wisconsin, the father of Earth Day. John Muir grew up here. Creation spirituality. I don't know if you heard of Matthew Fox. He's from Madison, Wisconsin. Aldo Leopold, the land ethic. That's from Madison. So we have this incredible political system and land ethic. And so then the Koch brothers, through Scott Walker, was going to make Wisconsin the exemplar of implementing these things. So that's how we got the incredible gerrymandering here in the state. So it's Wisconsin is the archetypal blue state. I mean, purple state. It's gone back forever between a Republican governor and a Democratic governor. But since Scott Walker and gerrymandering, the Republican Congress Assembly outnumbers the Democrats as a 2-to-1. So you lose your democratic ways, and they have these sophisticated think tanks and focus groups and so on. That's how you come up with this stuff. That's how under democracy. The other way that we lost out here in the Midwest, I live in Milwaukee, one of the archetypal consequences of globalization, all those manufacturing jobs disappeared. Now you had guys who came right out of high school into these great union jobs. They're all gone. So, and they're struggling. And now you have the problems with meth and so on. And you get somebody who comes along saying they're going to make America great again. So the blue wall disappeared. So all these are things that fit into it. And even so I'm just trying to hit as many points as I can because I've thought about this forever. Even by the mid 70s in Berkeley, things had changed quite a lot. Things had settled down a lot, and students were more, I just want to get an education that'll help me get a good job. And it got really difficult in the late 60s. I thought that these demonstrations in the cities burning, I thought that was going to go on forever. Just that chaos kind of wears you down. So it was it was a minor version of, I think, what happened after World War II and after the Depression. Guys came home, they just wanted to have kids and have a job and have a house with a picket fence in front. You know, and then that created that kind of sterile 50s Eisenhower era that we got into as college students in the 60s, the little picket fences that they sang about. Everybody lives in little boxes just the same. And then the marijuana that introduced us to these other realms. But that war was still being fought with Clinton. Did he inhale? So that 60s revolt against the hippies and that is still going on. So there's still that kind of split. And the other element that I feel here in Wisconsin is the urban rural divide. You know, the people that a little more educated, the big university towns, those are urban environments. But the rural Wisconsin, they're being left behind in terms of internet connections and that sort of stuff. The big hospitals, all these, I could go on and on. So these are just some of the things. We should see if we have some other questions, but if we don't, I'll keep going on about that. But I became politically active because I was 1A for the draft 3 times. Third time in the 1968, peak of the number of men. We had 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam at the time, and I was 1A for the draft. And so I realized politics was not a game, it was life and death. So that got me politically involved. And the way I think about it is I was so upset with my parents' generation for putting me into that situation. I very quickly found out what was really happening in Vietnam. It was anti-colonialism. The Vietnamese didn't really like the Chinese, but we were forcing them into the arms of the Chinese, and so on and so on. And it was McNamara eventually said the Vietnam War. He was the architect of that war. He's the Secretary of Defense for Kennedy. And about the only thing he said about the war, the Vietnam War was a tragic mistake, and we owe it to future generations to explain why. That was America shooting itself in the foot. I am concerned about what we're leaving young people now, and what they understand about how we got here, and what our generations have dumped onto them. So that's I feel that connection with them because of my Vietnam days. I'll stop there. Okay,
Go
another
ahead,
question?
Will.
So, Dr. Merritt, thank you for the presentation today. It was excellent. I had this question. This is this question I've been struggling with because I've kind of heard other Jungian analysts speak about this, and I wanted to kind of get your impression. You mentioned that Jung said he wanted to revitalize Christianity, and I'm a big follower of the I Ching as well, and I think there's something to that, like in 48 The Well, talking about going down to the foundations of life if we really want to organize society. But there's this other thought of, Nietzsche's thought of God is dead, at least the Christian God is dead. And I think maybe we're better off without the Christian God. And I've seen so many statistics showing there's no going back. It is dead. And here we're talking about, but then I've heard other Jungian analysts like maybe Jordan Peterson or even Murray Stein talk about how Christianity is so deeply entrenched in the Western culture, it's kind of unavoidable, inescapable. It's not going anywhere either. It's just sort of a symbol system that's been in a drought, and it just needs the water to reignite it. On the other hand, we're talking about the counterculture in the 60s, and we're talking about a new myth and a new God image. And this is the whole thing. I'm saying we're not going back to Christianity. We need a new myth. We need a new symbol system. We need new archetypes, a new story. And that was the intention behind the counterculture, but it faded. And so, and then here you mentioned 42 increase, and I hear the image from 42 increase. If he sees good, he imitates it. If he sees faults, he rids himself of that. And that being the guidance, the instruction, I mean, saying, can't we get rid of Christianity? Let's get rid of those faults, and let's model and embody a new image like the indigenous cultures. Or what about the I Ching? I mean, why can't that be the new foundation of culture? And like you were saying, if we want to change culture, we have to go down to the spiritual roots. And here there's this, I love this quote that everything begins in mysticism and theology, and everything ends in politics. And so why not go to the roots, a new symbol system, a new myth, which we have, and let's get rid of Christianity. There's no going back anyway, but are we stuck with it? And why does Jung want to revitalize it? That bothers me. And so
yeah, love it. That's quite frankly, I've probably done as much as I can with this Jungian eco-psychology, and I've been wanting to go back for years to work on the integration, I think, of Native American spirituality and Christianity, because Jung said, look at Christianity symbolically, and look at where we are today. With this archetypal concept, we can relate something from the I Ching, namely on the winter solstice text around 23 and 24, But we can also relate it to Christmas, right? The birth of Jesus is the Christian archetypal celebration of the winter solstice, the beginning of it. So that's how you reframe it. And of course, all the crap. My son started looking for some spiritual guidance several years ago. He started reading the Bible, and he found a part where under what conditions it's appropriate to stone a woman to death and all that, you know? So, but the same, so that there's a lot of dead wood, but I think there's a baby in the bathwater. And like you said, Jordan Peterson, it's like, yeah, you can't throw it out because it's everywhere. And I am saying that this is a way that you can counter the fundamentalists. And here's how I work with it in my practice. I've told several of my analysans, if you're going to go to one of these celebrations, and it really struck me, my wife is English, she likes the traditional stuff, even though she's atheist. So we went to a basilica here that the Polish people built on the south side of Milwaukee, quite an impressive place. And when I heard Silent Night, I thought, my God, that's about attachment theory, right? Winnicott said that the mother has to be beyond herself. In other words, in a complex, in an archetype, so you would say, in how she feels about the baby. This is precious. And we found out, science has studied it. It's the foundation of psychoanalytic theory too, and all religions about love, is that the infant needs to be held and touched in a loving way. And the archetypal image for that, the Madonna and child, but also Jesus in the manger, like this is the center of the universe. That's how that baby has to feel. It has to feel very special. So it feels that spiritual dimension, if you will, with the mother being in her complex and seeing it as, perceiving it as special. So that's one way you can listen to Silent Night. And just the concepts that you can use in your practice as an analyst. Jesus saying, why are you so concerned about the speck of wood in your brother's eye and you don't see your 2x4 in the other? Shadow, perfect. But the one that I really love especially is Jesus saying to have the eyes of a serpent and the heart of a dove. So the heart of a dove would be that innocent birth of Jesus, childlike thing. But if you go like a child, especially a young girl, into the world now, bad things can happen. So you need the eye of a serpent. But and think of the Garden of Eden and all the what consciousness, the problem that presented, especially with relationship to sexuality. But the you need the eye of a serpent, but you don't want to be paranoid and suspicious about anybody. So it's always this kind of balance. And so it's like, what can we, the way that I've kind of been thinking about it, I think Christianity, what we can rescue from the Christian tradition is I feel it more has a human place for me, thinking of that indigenous ancestor relation animal soul. It develops the human part about humans needing love, for example. I'm an entomologist. A grasshopper doesn't need love. Female lays the eggs in the ground, disappears. Humans have to have love. Babies have to be treated like they're special. Google Stanford blank face experiment to demonstrate perfectly to yourself that necessity of that mother infant bond. And it's so easy to see how that can get distorted. Winnicott talked about it so well. Attachment theory, shadow eyes of a snake, so yes. Joseph Campbell, at an aside, was asked if there's going to be a new religion. He thought if there would be, one would have an ecological framework. And yeah, those are some of my responses. But archetypally, this is what the West can contribute, what the East can contribute in terms of solstice recognition, the beautiful thing they said about hexagrams 23 and 24. The most powerful thing, though, that we've lost sense in the West especially in the scientific and the university community, is synchronicity. The I Ching is this phenomenal book of wisdom. I think it's, and for many reasons, I developed that in the Orange County presentations, why it is so. But the other dimension is we can consult it. We expect the synchronicity to link our troubled psychological state with a meaningful answer. There's no way that I can see yet in our Western science. We have some inklings, string theory, elements of quantum mechanics, but to me, it's been my experience since 1975 that it works. I'm not going to wait till they prove it, why it could work. It's like humans didn't wait to have it proven why we need love and why we need to love our babies, right? So I'm not going to wait till they come up with some scientific theory. It's my experience that it works. And when I get to a point of working with my analysans after I worked dreams, and we talked about initial in depth, I think, boy, if I were at this point with this issue, I would ask the Jing. That's when I suggest it to my analysans. To me, it's an important part of Jungian psychology. There are Jungians that think this is what Jung gives, this what gives Jung a bad name, but it's also our link to the indigenous worldview.
So I want to interrupt for just a second if I can. We have two other people that wanna participate. Let's let them in, and then we better call it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Moran.
And we'll learn. You're on mute.
Hi. Yes, my name is Margaret. First, I just wanted to thank you, Dennis. We've been in touch before. I was trying to find a Jungian analyst in Wisconsin. I moved from Boston to Wisconsin. I don't know if you remember. But I also lived in Berkeley and all over the United States. But thank you so much for your presentation. And living in Wisconsin now, I live in Whitewater. I can see exactly what you saw driving through the meadows on a summer night with all the fireflies. And it's a very spiritual existence here, as much as I love Berkeley and, the ocean and all those amazing places. It's wonderful here. My dad grew up here on a farm. I've gone back to the farm and kind of discovered my roots. And I guess my question is, so we're really lucky to live in a wonderful place across from Rice Lake near Whitewater Lake, if you've ever been here. And whenever I'm off work, I row. Except for now, of course, the lake is frozen. My struggle is kind of with people who live around here who have their summer homes, and they seem to treat the lake as if it's I don't know, you should never treat a lake like this, but kind of like it's the ocean with fertilizers and that kind of thing. And I think with eco-psychology, as you were saying, you have to feel a love for nature to care about it. So when I try to tell people, this is a really shallow lake, maybe we shouldn't do this or that, it's polluting the lake more. I don't think they feel connected to the lake in the way that they should, or the trees. They're always wanting to cut down trees and making their houses perfect. And the interesting thing here is sort of that they say it's a lot of the Wisconsin people say, oh, it's the people from Illinois. You may know what I'm talking about. They come here, they're wealthy, this is their second home, and they want it to look perfect. But I just wondered if you could comment some more on feeling connected to nature and loving nature in order to make it thrive, and environmental issues.
Yeah, no, that's like I said, is one of the main premises in eco-psychology is ways that find ways that you can help connect people to land as you're describing. One of the aspects that I missed when I was out in Berkeley. I missed a warm summer night in the Bay Area. As soon as things started to warm up, that cold air would come off, the fog would come off, the Pacific Ocean, and it would be cold,
Mm-hmm.
And I also
Mm-hmm.
missed that in the incredible life that's in the air, all the scents, from the blossoming plants in
Yes.
summer, the life in the Midwest and it's all natural. It's not irrigated land, it's
Mm-hmm.
all from the sky. So there's a certain dependency on nature where you get droughts and so on. So all that was so different. And I never felt totally anchored again to the land out in California like I did in even our Wisconsin woodlot, that part. But the main thing, and you put your finger on it, you feel with your sensitivities is what eco-psychology is talking about. When you have those sensitivities, then you then have to inform yourself as to what the negative effects are on this little lake that I feel so connected with. And then you learn about the effect of runoff from pollution, especially from things like golf courses and people fertilizing their lawns.
Yes.
And that's when you can
Yes.
begin to talk about, wow, it's going to be another dimension if you put it in native plants. And then you can watch this incredible symbiotic relationship between an animal and a plant, namely bees fertilizing the flowers, and. But the premise is you got to start with developing and cultivating those sensitivities, then finding out what all the things are that can destroy this, the pesticides, the herbicides, the cutting down the trees, and then doing things like just putting in. I put my Christmas tree, which wasn't picked up long enough, that I'll use that as a foundation for a brush pile, so the rabbits can hide in there, so I can always see my rabbits in the morning. Blah blah blah. So that's. But the things I
Uh-huh.
was talking about, that's the broadest dimension. Thank you for your question and your
Well,
comments.
thank you.
Why
Thank
don't you
you
go?
so much. And oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to have Keith go ahead, and then I think we better draw to a close.
Okay.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Well, I hope my comment here is worth keeping everyone late. It's a kind of a story of a synchronicity I had recently that it may be a minor synchronicity, but last night I was reading in Jung's Man and His Symbols book. First of all, he says, first, the dream should be treated as a fact about which one must make no previous assumption except that it somehow makes sense. And second, the dream is a specific expression of the unconscious. Okay, that's the context. Here's the coincidence. He goes on to say, one could scarcely put these principles more modestly. No matter how low anyone's opinion of the unconscious may be, he must concede that it is worth investigating. The unconscious is at least on a level with the louse, which, after all, enjoys the honest interest of the entomologist. And so I was wondering if you would like to comment on that.
Oh my God, a pretty lousy statement there. Where is that? Where'd you get that quote from? I don't remember it.
That's from Jung's book, Man and His Symbols. And my interpretation of that book is that's his attempt to bring his teachings to a lay audience, such
Yeah,
as
there's a
myself.
wonderful story. That's how I got started. Um, what happened was, if you haven't seen Face to Face, it's on YouTube. BBC had this guy that went around interviewing famous people, and they sent him down to interview Jung 2 years before he died, 1959. Jung in that film made this comment. He was asked if he believed in God, and without pausing, he said, "I don't believe in God. I know." And then later on, you have to put that together, what he said later on. He said, I can't believe in anything. I have to have a reason to think something is true or not. So by God, he meant the self. That's our Western projected image of the self, if you will. And when the British public saw that, they were wowed. So they put BBC, a publisher, put pressure on Freeman, who interviewed him, to go back to Zurich to have Jung write a book. And he was 2 years before he died, and he had his heart attack, and he was in pretty bad shape. He turned him down. But then the publisher persuaded Freeman to go down again. And between those two visits, Jung had a dream. He was lecturing to the masses, and they were listening attentively. That's how we got man and the symbols. So he said, okay, of course he had to follow his dream. So he only wrote one chapter, farmed out the rest to his followers like Henderson, von Franz, and so on. And it was for the layperson. I think about the only time he really wrote something for the layperson extensively. And that's what I read first. It was on sale. I bought it on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley on sale. And I read it and I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. And then I went to a party, one of my countercultural friends in Berkeley, who was interesting. She was Berkeley type person, late 60s. He said, well, have you read his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which I never heard of. Took the next week off from writing my thesis in entomology to reading that, and that did it. You know, those two books, and then I just read extensively, started writing out my dreams, and within 9 months I was applying the training. So be careful. That's the book that got me started. It's dated, but half of what you want to know about Jungian psychology is in the images. I reviewed it for one of my last of the 6, I think, big exams in Zurich, the individuation exam. I reread the book. So that's a goodie.
Well,
so thank you everybody for inviting me. And like I said, I can send Charlie the links to some of the videos that I talked about that illustrate these points and so on and so on.
That would be really good. I want to thank you also on behalf of myself and also of the Phoenix Friends of Carl Jung. And yeah, please do send me anything. I'll include that with the link that I'll send out to the recording of this. And then I'll also get you access to the recording, Dr. Merritt. So I think with that, shall we call it a day then?
Sounds good.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to log us off.
Thank you.
Bye now.
It's wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.